Good morning, everyone. Little reminder that we will only be open till 1 today, so that's different than the schedule. Dr. Daniel's a little bit under the weather, so keep him in your prayers. Everyone else have a good holiday if you can't make it in. Thought I'd do a little episode 6 of the Posture Report. I will link the playlist down below if you're interested. Essentially, the Posture Report is where I just get really nerdy and talk about all the deep questions that I get throughout the week. And these actually have been all connected together lately with the diaphragm, the pelvic floor, and breathing. So we're just going to talk a little bit about an extension of breathing, which is actually something new in research lately, is that breathing is one of the main, what causes the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. So we'll talk a little bit about what cerebral spinal fluid is. But in the past, it was thought that it was arterial and venous, since the cerebral spinal fluid bathes the brain. These are your ventricles here, and it also bathes the rest of the central nervous system, your spinal cord. And it's a shock absorber, but it also brings nutrients. So it brings nutrients into the brain, into the spinal cord. Also, the discs and the nerves are thought to be associated with that nutrient absorption. And then it drains here into the venous, so back down to the heart. So when we got shallow breathing, sometimes we're not, and we'll get into some of the research on this, but we don't get as much of that CSF flow in the lower part of the spine, down near in the lumbars, and also the force is not as much. So sometimes we can get toxic metabolite buildup in the brain. There are thoughts on long term, this would be more like Alzheimer's stuff, but just for general health, movement is life, right? So we talked a lot about the diaphragm in the last video. We're not going to cover that too much. One thing I kind of left out was the accessory breathing muscles. So in the research articles, they call this thoracic breathing. It's from these muscles up here. So we'll take a look at those really quick, but we want more of the diaphragm. The studies show that when the diaphragm, the belly breathing, abdominal breathing, all the same stuff, helps pump the cerebral spinal fluid more than breathing from the shoulders. And like we talked about last time, breathing from the shoulders and these accessory muscles, which we'll run through really quick, causes headaches and tightness in the rib cage and hurts your chiropractor's hands. Also did, in that playlist, there's a video on foam rolling and loosening them up and some exercises you could do as well to help you out there. So one of these accessory breathing muscles is, hope my face isn't in the way here, the pectoralis minor. So it attaches to your choroid process and some of these ribs. So it helps lifts the rib cage. And what we'll see a lot of times is people are actually kind of rounded because this one's kind of tight. So we talked about how people lean back and push the head. So foam rolling, this one can be really helpful, but also breathing from the diaphragm, you can even feel that kind of stretch when you get up straight, straight from the hip, using the diaphragm and the iliopsoas to lift the spine, not just lean the spine back where the curve doesn't change. We've just actually increased curve or, tilted the pelvis to make up for a problem or hiding it. So this tight muscle can be overused in conjunction with the traps too to help raise the shoulders to try to pump air in and out. But that's a dysfunctional breath and leads to problem and apparently poor CSF flow. Here's the SVMs and the scalenes. You guys know these because they're really tight on you. The front of the neck here, and these big guys there, they get really tight, attaching to the back. I can't even talk. I think it's time for a tea break. Attaching to the back of the skull, so they can cause compression there. A lot of people feel when we're digging in suboccipital space there, angry and tight. So a lot of people use these. You might even notice people get older, they get really developed here because they're overusing all the accessory breathing muscles instead of really activating the diaphragm. When you can feel it sometimes when you get good at breathing from the stomach. You'll feel that whole spine kind of straighten and flex. So not only is that good for the spinal muscles we're always talking about, those transversus spinalis muscles or the posterior chain, but also to help pump fluid. A lot of chiropractic techniques that are built off this. And they'll look at MRI in contrast to see what an adjustment looks like, to see for that cerebral spinal flow is better after an upper cervical adjustment or even adjustments in the spine can help move this flow along, because a lot of times we can't breathe well because we're locked up. But chiropractic can help you there. But a lot of times people are so locked up, especially in the diaphragm area, that I've never been able to move them there at all. That's about 15% of people, and it's probably even more like 25 now, 25% during winter, that I have trouble moving that lower thoracic area where the diaphragm is. It actually attaches more to the L1, I don't know if you got a L1, L3 area, but it really affects that lumbar thoracic junction where a lot of people get locked up, even in the lumbars are locked up in that area. So the more you're able to breathe, you might help your chiropractor out, get some movement there, and then you'll be more unlocked so you can get those deeper breaths from the diaphragm and you're not be so dependent on accessory muscle use. A little blurry here. This is Serratus Anterior. This is weak on people, but I'd say it's probably weak more. It's shortened in a lot of people because a lot of times we'll round the shoulders to do this motion, the Serratus Anterior, which kind of curls the scapula laterally and forward because it attaches on the medial portion from the ribs. So that's part of expansion. So it needs to be strengthened in a lengthened position or a eccentric contraction, if you will. We talked about one exercise, foam rolling and foundation training, or the push-up plus. This is a good one too, where you're driving the elbows up, trying to get the elbows up to your nose. It's really hard because that's pulling those scapula away, but you're not rounding. You're trying to keep your spine straight as you can there. Hinging helps with that, but we did the one exercise with the foam roller, so you're laying on there and you're kind of driving with the foam roller to kind of lever that up and open that up. But again, it's that squeezing motion, and then breathing while you're doing that, because when we're locking that muscle down that's dysfunctional, that's a good time to use your diaphragm. So here is a little MRI of what happens with the diaphragm. So this top one here, figure 1, is thoracic breathing, and we can see that figure 2 here is the diaphragm with abdominal breathing. And I noticed that abdominal breathing is better supine when you're laying on your back. You're just able to engage the diaphragm better. We talked a lot about that with the pelvic floor and gut disease and how a lot of people use belly breathing for IBS and Crohn's and stuff like that, because it helps the motility of the gut, and it obviously helps cerebral spinal fluid. So connecting some more dots there with breathing and strengthening your spine, so we get more of that contraction with that, the belly breathing, and that's engaging. This is the back part of the spine here, the spine is in the back. This is actually the front part of the spine. This is your spine. So engages more of that thoracic spine. We can see this a little shifted forward. There's not as much space there, and that's where the diaphragm is attaching to the spine itself. So forced inhalation, or what we know as the decompression stance in foundation training, is also another form of this, because we're expanding the rib cage 360 degrees. So we've talked a lot about foundation training. This is just another reason we push it, because it really helps hit the breathing. One problem I have is getting into the stance, like doing the founder or the chair pose, and not breathing. It's a big problem. And a lot of people have with exercise. They have trouble, forcing that breath, or they're doing quick, shallow ones, and they're using their shoulders to do it, and that just tightens up the neck. All right, let's go back here. So, little link to some of the research I was reading. Alzheimer's, other pathologies, because it removes toxic waste materials from your central nervous system and your brain. So it's important. This flow is good. Not only does it, shock absorbs the skull, if you get hit and impact, it protects the brain. It also does that for the spinal cord, but it's for flow. So everything, you can't get stagnant. Anything that gets stagnant is prone to problems and buildup of toxins. Just a little bit about the subject. They were looking at the C3 levels, thoracic lung level, and T8 level, which is a little bit above where the diaphragm attaches, and L3. I just find it interesting because C3 and L3 are beloved brothers, which we talked about in a previous episode, how every spinal bone has a connection. So it was interesting why they chose those levels to look at for the MRI. And that's about all we have there. Decompression stance. And last video we talked about the iliopsoas and the diaphragm connection, how they're actually linked, and they're both coming into this area. So both of them, we always talk about the hip flexor distance, doing the the measuring stick hands, to engage that iliopsoas muscle, but also the diaphragm to help breathe. So there's so much more with CNS, and a lot of this research has just come out in the past decade that breathing is so important. As if you didn't know that, oxygen is good, you kind of need it. But there's so many things, like we talked about in one of the earlier episodes, how your body is smarter than science. So this is just another aspect that the body knows what it's doing. You just need to work with it and get the basics strong, because it's free. Air is still free. Breathing is free. Just get a little bit better at it, and it's good for your whole body. All right. We'll see you guys soon. I'll stop talking because it's time to roll. Take care.